Okay, guys, welcome. So for round two of this, we're missing another class today, so I'm going to do it here again for you. So I'm going to do a bit of a lecture, then you guys are going to do a variety of activities and kind of come back to me, watch a movie, come back to me, and then you'll be done for today. Okay? So hopefully you all did your homework. That is background information. Please upload it up online for me so that I can check it there, or you can email it to me, but I prefer you upload it online. Okay, so the last couple days we have been talking about how and why Japan got involved into World War II like it did. What happened post World War One? What happened in the Meiji era to create Japan? What created Japan like it did? What events created that to happen? So this is what we're going to be looking at today. We're going to look at the Japanese invasion of Manchuria today. That's going to be our primary focus. We're not going to get to the Sino-Japanese War today. That will be next class. And the three-power pact as well, we'll actually have to wait on as well. But we will be looking a brief bit at the Lytton report today. We'll spend some more time on that next class as well. Okay, so central question today. The impact of Japanese nationalism and militarism on Japan's foreign policy in the 1930s. Okay, so vocab that you will need to know. We will get through all of these terms today. I promise you, unlike last time, I changed the PowerPoint, I realized, and some of the vocab words we actually didn't end up going over, but all of these will be in what we talk about today. We're going to get right up into the Anti-Containment Pact. Okay, here we go. So, first things first, internationalism. So Japan is becoming kind of an international power. I'm sorry, I'll move my face somewhere else. Towards a policy of developing an economy by peaceful means. So the 1920s, as we talked about in the United States, is the Roaring 20s. We have great prosperity in the United States. The economy is booming after World War I. The same thing is going on in Japan. Japan is booming. They are greatly westernized. We talk about how quickly they westernized and how quickly they modernized. So the West, though, is very, very worried about Japan. Great Britain has several key colonies in the Pacific, being Hong Kong and Malay. Both are colonies that are controlled by Great Britain that are very important to Great Britain. The United States has Hawaii and the Philippines. Hawaii is a colony right now. It is not a state yet. The Philippines is where the United States has the largest military buildup after the Spanish-American War. So both countries have a lot to kind of lose here in terms of gaining to Japan, which they're worried about. Japan is building up their fleet, and they kind of they're getting a little uneasy about what Japan might do. So we have several treaties here that we're going to talk about. So the first is the Washington Treaty. This is also known as the Five-Power Treaty as well. So you can see it here, and you can see it here. Okay? So the Five-Power Treaty was basically a way to try and make everyone happy in terms of how much they were trying to prevent another world war from happening. So they wanted to limit the size of the military. They didn't want an arms race to be building up. They didn't want every country trying to build up their military to the biggest possible size. So the Five-Power Treaty tried to eliminate this. And it was the 5-5-3 ratio. My head's blocking that now. The 5-5-3 ratio said that this was the size of tonnage, so how many tons each battleship could weigh. The U.S. had how much they could carry, I guess. The U.S. was 5, Great Britain was 5, and Japan was 3, hence the 5-5-3 ratio. France and Italy were involved, but they didn't have the same kind of power that those other three had, so they were at 1.67. So why is Japan a little bit smaller? Kind of a good question to ask. Why is Japan not getting the same as Great Britain and the U.S. in this? Japan got a guarantee that the U.S. and Britain would stop fortifying Far East territories. So the United States and Great Britain were kind of building up their territories in Asia to try and kind of protect against Japan. And that worried Japan. So in this treaty, they did get that promise they would stop doing this. The Four-Power Treaty was just maintaining their status quo, that each power, Japan, France, Germany, U.S., Britain, Japan, France, and Italy would all just keep the status quo. They would all respect each other's territory in the Far East, and no one would attack anybody else. Sounds good for right now, but it's not going to work out so well in the long run. And finally, the Nine Power Treaty said that Japan would recognize Chinese territory and sovereignty, that they would not attack China or go after any Chinese territories, which would not last very long. So the key two that we want to know here are the Washington Treaty and the Four Power Treaty, and how in the early 1920s we're looking at Japan as kind of trying to somewhat keep a peaceful means with the West. The West is worried about Japan, but they still want to keep a peaceful relations with them. They don't want to go into another world war. Okay, so next. What happens is in 1929 in the United States is the Great Depression. The stock markets drop. This does not only just affect the United States, it affects pretty much every other country in the world. And Japan was hit hard by this for a variety of things. So we talked about in the mid-1800s, Japan's population rose very quickly, as we can see to the left here. And because the technology improved for farming in Japan, so they had more food available, which means their population also soared at this time. So Japan's population is at a record high right now. But then with the Great Depression, we have a lack of raw materials. In fact, they don't even have enough rice for their own people. They need to start importing basics like rice. But because of the Great Depression, every country starts putting tariffs on their goods. A tariff is an extra tax on other countries importing their goods. So this is the idea of protectionism, which is right here, so that every country is trying to protect their own goods, so that other countries can't get a. Every country is kind of out for themselves at this point. Every country wants to help themselves at this point and not worried about other countries. So Japan's main export at this time is silk. And during this time, silk drops 1/5 of the price it was in 1923. So because of this, Japan is in kind of a pickle financially. They are in a pretty severe economic depression at this point. Unemployment rose to 3 million people. Food is not really viable at this point. So they are in some financial trouble right now. And we talked about with the huge rise of population, the combination of two put Japan in a difficult time. By 1937, their population was up to about 70 million. Okay, so because of all these issues Japan had, they needed to find a place for their people, some of these people to go. They couldn't keep them all in Japan. So they wanted to push to emigrate them outside of Japan. The United States kind of said no. There were some huge racist issues going on in the United States, and Japan refused to send, didn't want their people going to the United States anymore. So what happens is several things. So China is a fairly weak state in 1931. There is no unified government at all in China at this time. All there is in China right now are regional warlords. So every region of China has a different warlord. So Manchuria has its own warlord. Think of it as like state governors that are, but instead of ruling with politics, they're ruling with the size of their military, is what China is looking at right now. So Japan sees Manchuria as a good solution to many of their problems. It has a lot of natural resources, which they really, really need and they can sell. And it also has land to send their people to. So the Japanese send about 500,000 people to be farmers in Manchuria. But there are some issues with the local people, so most of them don't really become farmers, and they do actually other such jobs in Manchuria. So in a 14-year period, Japan sends a significant amount of their population to Manchuria. The army, the military and army would be required to help maintain order against the traditional divide of China. So China is definitely not too thrilled about what's going on here in Manchuria. The only real overall leader in China right now, again, there's warlords throughout China, is Chiang Kai-shek. Chiang Kai-shek is the nationalist leader of China. Mao Zedong is not even a thought right now, okay? 1931 is way too early to be talking about Mao Zedong. Chiang Kai-shek is pretty much the only any type of unifying force at Chiang Kai-shek. but it's still, again, he did not control the whole country. It was still mostly broken up to warlords. So Chiang Kai-shek has a serious issue with Japan trying to invade and take over Manchuria. So what happens is, the Kwantung Army had been in Manchuria since about 1905, maintaining order. The Kwantung Army is the Japanese, is a militant group of the Japanese. They were sent there in 1905 to kind of control parts of Manchuria, but some aspects of the Kwantung Army started to develop an extremist view, and many extremist officers knew that the senior military staff wanted to expand its role in the area. By 1928, the Kwantung officers decided to assassinate the nationalist warlord of Manchuria without the authority of the government. So now you actually have these military officers acting without the permission of the Japanese government. They're actually just doing what they want in Manchuria away from the homeland of Japan. So Japan is not really able to even control their military outside of Japan anymore, which is kind of a worry. The government in Tokyo tried to punish the officers who assassinated this official. However, they were unable. This was blocked by the senior army staff because they had the support of the new emperor. So basically, at this point, the government in Tokyo had no real power. The government resigned from here on out, and foreign policy became hostage to extremist army officers. So you have extremists running pretty much the foreign policy of Japan from this point on out. So at this point, what we're going to do, I'm going to let you guys have a little bit of a break from listening to me. I am actually going to put a movie on for you guys right now. And you're going to watch it from my screen so you don't have to change anything. Okay? Here we go. This is Japan, by the way.
The League of Nations had failed. It had failed to enforce disarmament, it had failed to create stability, and it failed to maintain peace. This is Poland, 1939. War had returned for the second time to the world. The League was on shaky foundations from the 1920s, but the 1930s would be the decade which saw the ultimate degradation of their control, and it all started with an event called the Manchurian Crisis of 1931. Welcome to Flashback. Japan had suffered more than most from the Great Depression following the fateful Wall Street crash. The population was booming, with more than 1 million mouths to feed every year. Based on the far eastern edge of Asia, Japan was an incredibly isolated country until it needed to open up trade to receive necessary materials like oil and coal. It had virtually no natural resources of its own to exploit, and was reliant on international networks to import its goods. Into 1930, unemployment was high, and agricultural failures brought about a famine in large sections of rural communities.
General public's life was very hard in those days, and most of the young military officers came from low-class agricultural families, and agriculture was in a very, very hard position.
1930年、昭和5年ですね。5年頃は
1930 was the time when Japan entered what might be called her convulsive period of history.
まだ陸軍はそれほど強い力はなかったけれども。
The influence of the ultra-nationalist group.
例えば右翼の
I'm sorry, guys. I made a mistake and I put the wrong movie on for you. But this is the right one. So you can see Japanese modernization. You have Western dress, you have cars, you have style. It's all coming from, you have movies, all of this is Western influenced. Pretty dramatic change in a short period of time in Japan.
The fruits of westernization soon turned sour. America's Great Depression in 1929 had a devastating impact on Japan, and Japanese nationalists blamed the attachment to Western values for the ills of their own society. Japan could not feed its population, which had been growing at a rate of 1 million a year. The farmers worked plots that could barely support one family. Much of Japan's staple food, rice, had to be imported. To pay for the rice, Japan exported silk. Silk prices collapsed, and as Western countries erected tariff walls to protect their own industries, Japan's export trade sank to its lowest level ever. Millions went hungry. Unable to reduce its surplus population by emigration, Japan turned to a drastic solution: the acquisition of living space in China, the great landmass 400 miles to the west. China was Japan's manifest destiny. Poverty-stricken, seemingly ungovernable, torn by warlords, banditry, and civil war, China needed law and order as badly as Japan needed space, or so Japan's leaders were able to reason. For Japan, the gateway to China was Manchuria, where Japan already had commercial rights to the railway and a garrison to guard it. This overseas force, called the Kwantung Army, was in many ways a law unto itself. In 1931, radical Kwantung officers decided to colonize Manchuria. They manufactured an incident by blowing up a section of the railway. They then presented it to the outside world as an unprovoked attack by Chinese troops. Only years later did the full story emerge. Within hours of the explosion, the fighting spread to the outskirts of Mukden, the capital and headquarters of the Kwantung Army. Unhindered by a weak and embarrassed government in Tokyo, the Kwantung Army swept across Manchuria. Manchuria became Manchukuo, a puppet state under Japanese protection. As titular head of state, Japan secured the services of Henry Puyi, the last emperor of China. China appealed to the League of Nations, but the League was an instrument of conciliation, not an international police force. It sent an Englishman, the Earl of Lytton, to investigate. His report condemned Japan.
Manchuria, you will see on this map, is a part of China situated north of the Great Wall. It is about the size of France and Germany combined. Trouble began on the 18th of September last year when Japanese troops occupied
So again, this is the Lytton Report, okay? Lytton Report.
the town of Mukden. The excuse given by them was that Chinese soldiers had blown up a section of the South Manchuria Railway and fired upon a Japanese patrol. We found that the Japanese occupation of this large part of China was not justified on the ground of self-defense, and that the new state which had been set up was a Japanese protectorate rather than a genuine case of Manchurian self-determination. The issue is very critical, and the peace of the world hangs in the balance.
Lord Lytton's verdict was overwhelmingly endorsed by the League, to the fury of Japan's delegate Yosuke Matsuoka.
I call on His Excellency Mr. Matsuoka, delegate of Japan. China has long been derelict in her international duties
as a sovereign state.
Matsuoka accused the Western imperial powers of hypocrisy, pointing out that they had been the first to acquire interests in China. And with that, he and Japan walked out of the League.
Forever, they were not part of the League of Nations anymore.
At home, Matsuoka was treated as a hero. Defying the great powers, Japan had made off with a share of the decaying Chinese empire. As for the League, it had shown itself to be ineffective, and it was never to recover its authority.
Okay, so now we have a Japanese democracy that really no longer exists. We have pretty much the militants in control of Japan from this point on through World War II. At this point, I want you to pause me, and I want you to go to the topics. That is Japan, and under that there is a document called the Manchurian Crisis 1931. It's a very short reading. I want you to read that document, and there's some questions on the back, just in terms of the definitions. I want you to fill out the definitions for those questions based on the reading. It shouldn't take you more than about 10 minutes to do. Okay, so pause me right now and go do that under topics. Okay, thank you. Okay, hopefully now you're back with me. Okay, so we're going to continue this lecture. We're almost done. So militarism replaces democracy. After 1929, militants made life difficult for the Japanese Diet. Remember, Diet is like the parliament / Congress of Japan, which is very democratic. So from this point on, the government tried to curb the power of the military, but the new government tried to curb it, and he was assassinated by extremists. So again, you have democracy trying to hold Japan, but assassinations made it very, very difficult. In 1931, there was a planned coup, but it was actually called back at the last minute. So the military tried to totally overthrow the democracy at this point, but it was actually did not happen. So for the most part, you have the military, and you have some kind of form of democracy that is barely existing in Japan at this point. So as you just watched the movie, the Mukden or the Manchurian Incident of 1931, they are the same thing. Mukden is just the city in Manchuria that it actually happened. So on the 18th of September 1931, a bomb was planted by the Kwantung Army of Japan and exploded the railroad that Japan actually owned. But they did this because they wanted to basically create a conflict against China. So they basically tried to say that the Chinese did this, which was not true. So they did this without Tokyo's approval, Tokyo's government approval, and the army blamed the Chinese terrorists and seized the city of Mukden. Proclaiming a need to protect Japanese life and property, the Kwantung continued to take Manchuria. When Prime Minister Inoue tried to halt this aggression, he was assassinated by naval officers. Okay? And Manchuria became a puppet state called Manchukuo. Okay? So when we actually hear the term Manchukuo, Manchukuo is the term for the puppet state of Japan, of Manchuria. Okay? So Manchukuo is in reference to the puppet state. So they said it's independent, but it's being really controlled by Japan. Okay, hopefully that is clear. Okay, other such things going on. Foreign policy goals at this point. Did I get this far with the other class? Did I? I think so, I did. Okay, so Japan set out its foreign policy goals. So the Russians put pressure on Japan's empire to form from the north needed to resist. So they kind of wanted more and more policy control. The military conquest of all of China should be undertaken. So these were kind of the general goals that Japan wanted to take over eventually. Okay, so this is just about the end. So in 1936, we're kind of jumping here. We have the Anti-Comintern Pact with Germany and Japan. Italy joins about a year later. So Japan saw the USSR as the main threat to Manchukuo. So USSR is due north of Manchukuo. Japan saw allies that would support military intervention with the USSR if they chose to attack Manchukuo or Manchuria. Okay, so now who is pretty much the only country that is going to jump in with Japan at this point? It's going to be Germany. So in 1936, we see the first alliance between Germany and Japan, and then Italy. This is our picture down below. So already we have the Nazi Party in control in Germany. We will go back eventually. After we finish Japan, we'll go actually back to the 1920s and look at look at Germany, and we'll work our way all the way up with Germany as well. So we're using both countries, and we're going to work our way up in the internment period with both countries. So we'll go back to Germany eventually here too. So don't get worried if you don't know what's going on with Germany yet. Okay, so at this point, we now have a pact between Germany and Japan. So it's a series of events that has led Japan to this point. Japan is not the country that it was in 1920, post-World War I. They are a very different country for a variety of reasons, which we have talked about. Okay, and that is all. Oh, I'm sorry, last one for you guys. In 1937, Japan withdraws from the naval treaties with Britain and the U.S. So that was the 553 treaty, the Washington Treaty, which we talked about. So Japan said, sorry, we're no longer going to be involved in this. This is kind of not relevant anymore. And at this point, Japan starts building these massive ships. The Yamato and the Musashi were twice as big in terms of tonnage than any U.S. ship at this point. So Japan starts to build these just giant battleships, you could say in somewhat preparation for an eventual another world war. So this is the state of where we are right now. We have Japan in an alliance pretty much with Germany and Italy by 1937. We will continue with this when I see you all on Friday. You do have a substantial amount of homework. We will talk about some of your questions on Friday in class. Okay? Make sure you turn in your question sheet for your IA. Submit it online for me. Okay? Have a good day. Talk to you soon.